Alright, welcome back. Let's start another chess game here at the rapid time control here. So we get a 1561 and we're playing as black. So we have e4 on the board and we're going to play a Sicilian, which is our normal response to e4 here. Knight f3, d6. Looking like it's going to be an entry point to an open Sicilian here, and this kind of leaves it up in the air. Knight c3 leaves it up in the air whether he's going to play d4 or go with a closed Sicilian. So we'll go with knight f6, and this setup is leaving it also up in the air whether it's going to be a Najdorf Sicilian, which is the reason I played d6 instead of knight to c6 here earlier. That's the reasoning behind 2 d6 versus 2 knight c6. All right, bishop c4, kind of going into like a Bowdler type attack, or like a closed Sicilian with the bishop on c4. We'll play e6, which is kind of the response you'll want to see anyway when you have the bishop on c4. E6, and then a3 is a good move. It's basically taking the sting out of a little bit out of d5, because after d5 takes, the bishop can drop back to a3, where it's basically like out of the question of getting attacked by any of our pieces. So the question here is whether to push d5 or not. So d5 takes, replaces, we're putting a pawn in the center, and if white advances, we just take the bishop, they take the knight, and then we replace. I think d5 is a good move here, but we could also wait to push d5 and play bishop e7 looking to castle. It's likely that the bishop will drop back anyway. But so with that in mind, considering that the bishop's going to drop back anyway, I think it's kind of good to play d5 here before the bishop drops back, so that this move kind of in a sense comes with a tempo here at the end, because this is like ideally where we want our pawns. We want them on this side of the board and on d5 here. All right, now we're expecting castle. We can play bishop to e7 and castle ourselves is a good plan. We can play knight to c6. But the only thing we don't want to do is to make sure, we want to make sure this d5 pawn is guarded twice. So we don't want to put our bishops along the d file here too early. d5 or d4, I mean a d4 push is possible, but I don't think it's really good for black here. I think bishop e7 is more thematic with most Sicilian positions, and then we can castle and play knight c6. All right, we'll go with our plan and castle here. And the reason that I am hesitant about pushing d4 early here is because it opens a diagonal, which there's pros and cons to that move, but I think, at least in my mind, the cons of opening up that light squared diagonal are at this point more beneficial than it would be to push d4, preventing him from playing d4. So we have d4 here from the white pieces. We can play bishop to e6, adding another defender to this pawn, because after captures, he'll have 3 attackers here. We can take, which is normally what you want to do in the Sicilian. I think taking is pretty simple here. And we can play with kind of an isolated queen pawn where we look to control the d4 square and maybe eventually push this d5 pawn ourselves. So let's take and see what white plays. So he plays queen takes, which allows us to develop with tempo here, and he cannot take because we take back with the knight here. And then we can add a defender if necessary, or even since he took with a queen, we can actually push d4 ourselves and see where it goes from there. Or we have different options we can play. We can consider, playing d4, developing our bishop, are all valid options we have here. So, but certainly he has 3 attackers here. We want to keep that in mind. And we have 2 defenders. So I think the safe move we can keep in mind is bishop e6 here. Kind of the more risky move is d4, because we can play it because he only has 2 defenders, obviously, but this knight jumps in to a different square, and this diagonal with a bishop opens up. I have to think about if it's worth it here, or what other options we have. The pawn is also a little bit hard to reinforce, I guess. Well, playing bishop e6 doesn't take the option away of playing d4 unless white plays knight d4. Or, let's see, or he adds a defender to the d4 square. So, let me think about this. Yeah, let's play bishop e6, a safer option here. And then we also have the squares queen b6 and queen a5 to develop our queen eventually. Maybe replacing our queen with a rook here. Bishop e6 is kind of a safer move, but I wouldn't be surprised if d4 was a good way to gain the initiative for black. All right, we have bishop to g5, which basically the threat of this move, as I see it, is to take, and then now he'll have 3 attackers on the pawn, so he'll be able to win the pawn if that sequence happens. What we can do now is play d4. We could go with our original idea. The knight would probably drop back to b5, and then we can maybe exchange the bishops, put his rook on kind of a goofy square, and perhaps play a6, kicking the knight. And his knight might be trapped. No, his knight would be able to recapture. So that's the thing, is the knight would be able to come back here after the end of that sequence. So how do we deal with both the bishop threat here of taking the knight and winning the pawn, but also the knight threat of coming back around and blockading or winning this pawn if we push it? Let's see. There must be some options here. Also, if we notice, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop takes, wins a pawn on the center here, but we also, at the end of that sequence, have, if we calculate one more move, we have bishop takes, most likely rook to b2 here, which attacks this pawn. And bishop takes pawn. No, because it's defended by the queen. And then it seems like this pawn is also falling at the end of that sequence. So I think d4. I don't know. Let's see, if d4 and bishop takes, we just take the knight. I think d4 perhaps works. It might work because of a queen d5 tactic at some point in the line. Because I'm calculating, let's see, knight to b5. Can maybe play queen b6, giving up that pawn. No. Bishop takes. Queen takes. Wait, okay. I think I see something here. I think I see something. And I think it involves, if we get this line, I think it involves a queen d5 tactic. But yeah, that was hard to calculate for me. Quite hard to calculate. All right, we have knight to e4, adding pressure on this on this knight here. And if we try to pin it to the queen, obviously he takes. So that's not an option. But fortunately, the pressure is relieved from the position, I guess, from knight b5 there. So let's see. We cannot win material, I don't think. But I think this might be the best continuation. We might have to play... How about this tactic now? Bishop takes, rook takes, queen takes. But then is there bishop takes, queen takes there? Let's try this tactic. I think this tactic might work. Either it works or I'm getting just blown off the board. Clean, smooth. Smooth and clean here. Yeah, it's hard to spot queen d5. Because if knight takes, we take back with a bishop. Bishop takes, we actually take the rook. And then he wins this pawn back, but then maybe a rook d8 arrives smack dab on her back rank. I've been really trying to be more careful with the tactics here. I spent, what, 3.5 minutes thinking about that last move. So yeah, I think queen d5, this pressuring the entire position here. Our queen arrives on the board like a thunderclap here. Knight takes, bishop takes, and the key thing is the rook is hanging. The rook hangs. These pieces also, I mean, this piece is protected, but yes. We could even, maybe this is even cleaner. Because now both pieces just hang simultaneously. Maybe g takes is even cleaner. The only thing we're scared of there is like a legitimate checkmate threat. With his knight maybe moving and his queen getting off the board, but I think concretely this line is like cleaner than the other line. Because now we take. Because now, I mean, okay. That's a good move. So c4, we can en passant, obviously. We play. We play like knight there, because if knight takes, we take back. But what if rook? Then we take the rook. Duh. c4 here. If he takes with pawn, we take here. But that really isn't accomplishing, I don't think. Knight to here, then if he takes here, we take. But the thing is, at the end of that, we aren't really threatening much. His bishop will have to move back, and then maybe a rook. Maybe a rook. Because if we look at the pawn positioning there, we have a passed pawn. So I think that is the key, is that we get a passed pawn in an endgame. Incredibly hard to calculate. Either, I mean, now if he takes this, we take that, take back, and then take the bishop. If he takes here, we take the queen. He takes the queen, we take the bishop. Takes here, we take back with a queen, and we have a passed pawn. And if he moves away with the queen, we take this. Or we take that way. Yeah. Oh my lord. And his bishop is still hanging. Knight d5. And the engine probably will be able to instantly tell us, like at the end of the game, if this is a good or bad move. I don't think, because the computer's way better at tactics than humans are, at like calculation of concrete lines where there's like a simple series of captures one after each other. But what humans have that the computer doesn't have is a concept of positional understanding, like fundamentals and principles. And so that's how humans are able to like develop openings and like actually kind of know how to develop their pieces, like, you know, pattern recognition of like different positions, fundamental rules, like such as like controlling the center, for instance, development of pieces, things like that. It's only when you get into concrete lines, like such as this one, that involve very like specific, like if this happens, you have to capture this way. And if this happens, you have to capture that way. That's when you actually have to start thinking in like calculative terms rather than like theoretical or like positional terms, if that makes sense. It's like where you enter the game of tactics versus like a strategist type thinking mindset. Like I'm not thinking strategy here. I'm thinking what is like a concrete way I can win material in this line. Because before this, I didn't even see c4. And c4 kind of came on the board. And it works because of this pin against the queen, because the queen is undefended, and I can't just en passant and take the rook, because, I mean, we lose the game. But yeah, this is the concrete line we're looking at. And our opponent is taking his time. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I think there's a lot of bad options here for the opponent. And I think there's only one like good option, which may not, if he overthinks it, I think the only good option for our opponent here is taking the queen. And that is like a move you can easily overthink if you think about the ramifications of knight takes queen too much, because you think, oh, your bishop is still hanging. Well, solve that problem. You move the bishop. And I was like, there's nothing my knight is attacking after I take the queen, because this pawn is guarded. This is obviously towards the king. Maybe he's deciding whether he wants to counterattack my knight or save his bishop. I don't know. But I think definitely pawn takes queen is the best option for him. Okay, knight takes, and now we have queen takes. Because of rook, here it's not guarded, is like a key thing we had to realize. Rook to e1, we just capture the rook with checkmate because of this goofy rook in the corner here is not doing much. His bishop pretty much has to retreat at this point. And we could maybe even play like bishop. No, because then he skewers. Okay. His bishop retreats to h6. Now I think we have to be careful about playing bishop d6 now, because what happens there is, I think we play bishop d6, he plays queen to g3 check, and since it's a check I have to move, or yeah, I have to move, or I take, he takes back, well, and then I guess I can move the rook, but he takes, and it gets real like concrete after that. I think maybe just moving the rook in the first place. Well, let's see. Yeah, he still can't go rook to e1. Maybe moving the rook to the half-open c file. But the thing is, I might want the other rook there, because he doesn't really have queen g3 check, because I have just takes. So I think rook to the d file is not terrible here. He does not have queen g3 check because we just take. It opens up, and then we start advancing this pawn with serious problems for white. And we might have to start speeding up here, because now we're getting down into the 3-minute time frame. I mean, we still have the increment, but yeah, this is very nice. Okay, b3, a good way to, I guess, defend. But now this pawn is kind of anchored to here. It's like preemptively defending c4, I guess. We can play, I don't want to get inaccurate here. We can play f5, maybe. But I don't like how that really boxes in my queen a lot here. I'm thinking oh, the point of this move might be so that he can play rook to e2, put his rook on the second rank. So we can maybe play bishop to d6. He could have queen to g3. We take, and then we have a good bishop on d6, I would think. Let's see. And we can hopefully use this passed pawn to gain an advantage in the endgame here. I mean, this just clearly passed pawn, I think. And then the only problem we have to reckon with is how are we getting our king out, since these squares are blocked. It's threatening mate in 1. I think g3 is a way to defend it. This is a way to defend it for sure. f4, and we have queen to g3, which is the line I calculated. f4 actually might be the most potent here, because we cannot, well, we can play queen to e3 check, trade. And then use the bishop maybe to reinforce, opening up the file for our rook. And from this point on, I'll probably have to play a little bit quicker here. I mean, I feel like we got out of the most concrete tactical portion of the game there fine, which is good. And that's where you should probably spend most of your time. I feel like I didn't spend enough time in that portion of the game in my last couple of games, and that was costing me like missed tactics and stuff. But you shouldn't feel too bad when you're missing like kind of obscure tactics that the engine finds in like 1 second, because the engine is just like, you can't even like comprehend how much better computers are at finding that sort of like concrete stuff than humans. I mean, humans, it's like you have to have a long time developing your pattern recognition to find things like this. Okay, now f5 looks more appealing to me, because if he plays, well, he can still play rook to d2. So I might want to put my rook on the e file actually myself, so he cannot play rook to d2, and then we'll play maybe the other rook to d8. And that g3 push takes the opportunity away from him to play queen g3 check. Okay, yeah, I might have missed this move, so I mean, we're still okay. It's not like we missed anything crazy, but I think we are in pretty good shape, though, as long as we can utilize our passed pawn either to queen or to win material. So now, yeah, we reinforce this and activate our other rook, and if his rook moves away, we win this pawn. Okay, he reinforces it via that route, so we can go what's another way we can double our rooks here, because if we're expecting this, we can double. Because these pawn pushes will eventually get stopped by our pawn here on b7. Try not to blunder this game away due to time control here. He doesn't have any useful checks, and eventually we're going to have to get an all hands on deck solution here somehow with our king. But the ultimate end state here is that when we move our rook to d7, our queen has more freedom of movement than his queen, because he's kind of attached to trying to blockade the passed pawn. If he has no checks that he can deliver move. If he can deliver moves with checks or with a serious tempo, that's a way he can get his queen out, but it seems to me like it's more immobilized than our queen. Our queen can move, for instance, here, and then look for other targets as long as we somehow keep a connection to this pawn. Okay, proceed with our plan. And then we can move, let's see. We can move here. And then a good plan would be to play f5, trade queens, and get a pawn mass in the center of the board. So we cannot play this because after trades, takes, and we lose a rook. So let's keep contact with this piece, this pawn. And if, yeah, c5, we move up here with check. I mean, we really want to actually induce the move c5 because we want this square free for our queen, so then we can move this up. This pawn on f5. So that's my logic for sacrificing this pawn. It might not be sound actually, it may be just a blunder, but we sacrifice that pawn or give him a passed pawn in exchange for this one square here, because we check and then that guards both the pawn and we're able to play f5. And then if we are able to like trade queens here somehow and get a central pawn mass, I think we're in pretty good shape. Or we can try to get another passed pawn over here and just cook him, because his king will have to go somewhere back here, and then we'll have to bring our king over. Let's try. This. I think using his pass pawn now is his form of counterplay. So we can check, but he can block with a rook. Or we can advance our pass pawn here. Because if he trades the queens here, he's going to be cooked, I think, by 2. If we get 2 pass pawns, I think it's GG. The reason I move my rook is basically purely to take away this tempo from him with this push. And I think here there's rook check, and he has to go back, and then rook check, let's see, here, takes, and we have a queen versus 2 rooks endgame. I don't know. Let's try. Let's try F. Well, to hell with it, we'll go here. And then let's try this. Because we might have a check and then a queen here. Second queen. And then if we can win this rook if we can win one of the rooks here in a skewer or a check, then we're in very good shape. or create another pass pawn. Let's see. Alright, now we have another pass pawn. And we can let's make sure we aren't the ones getting checkmated here. That might have been the wrong square, damn. Because, yeah, I was eyeing one of these squares here. And we are not, let's see. Looking to play h5 to force his king back. I think f5 would be maybe a way, but all it does is really let's see. Here he runs to there, and now he's actually giving a mate threat. So I think that would be a blunder. We go here first. Just have to not get mated here. As long as we don't get mated, I think we're winning. Setting a trap for him. And advancing our pawn here. I don't think I even want to kick his king yet to invite these other pawns. We'll set another trap for him. Either of these pawns. And I think we may win on time here. Let's see. Could actually play no, because then he returns. now we're almost queening here. Let's see, we can take and make a queen. Final tactic here. And now it should be an easy win. All right, GG. That was a intense game there. A lot of tactics. We can analyze this. All right, 20 best, 9 excellent, 1 miss. So we'll see where the miss is. But yeah, Sicilian defense, and it was kind of a Bowdler type game. But e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. He refuses to push d4 and open up the center here, going into any sort of theoretical line. But he goes bishop c4, kind of like a Bowdler defense type situation. E6, I chose e6. a3, creating room for his bishop, and d5. Kind of like the most concrete way. He has to respond to this. He has to take. We take back his bishop. He could have given this check, I guess, but then we could even block with a knight. We could block with a bishop, and it's a straightforward way to deal with that. But yeah, bishop e7, castles and castles, and I think this position is pretty much equal for both sides, and that's not what you're going for with the white pieces, or at least it shouldn't be. You shouldn't be just playing for equality as white. You should be trying to play for the advantage, especially against like a Sicilian position. But d4 is the correct way to try to strike back at the center. Yeah, c4, I guess I didn't even consider. Just blunting the bishop would be probably a better way, and then a6 and b5, just cementing a pawn chain in that restricts this white bishop from doing anything useful, at least along this diagonal here towards the king. So I should have pushed c4. That was a miss on my part. Probably we take, because taking is kind of like the classic Sicilian idea. The reason you want to put your pawn on c5 in most variations of the Sicilian is so when they push d4 you can take. But in this specific instance, that's not very accurate, because you just had something better to do with the c5 pawn, which is pushing c4, creating a pawn blockade of the white squares here towards the king. We take, and then we have knight c6 developing with tempo towards the queen. I think that move is straightforward, and then it got really into the thinking here, but I thought, yeah, the safest option, definitely bishop e6. And then we have bishop g5, trying to push for the advantage, and I think a while on this one, but the correct move was d4. And yeah, I'm proud that I was able to find that. And I thought, yeah, knight b5 was the way he was going to try to push for the advantage here, but he plays knight to e4 here. And so we have bishop takes a2 is the, yep, correct. It's the line I played. Then rook takes, and then queen to d. No, I missed another tactic of some sort. Knight takes. Because if bishop takes, you just guard this. And then what if rook e1? Pinning it, you just guard it again. And you're just up a piece. But I did not see, I guess, that tactic. I saw the tactic of, I mistakenly thought queen to d5 was the tactic that was good in this position. But after knight takes, we take back with the pawn, and then yeah, c4 is the move that I did not see that absolutely saves this for the white pieces. And I didn't even calculate for c4. So that was just like an oversight on my part. I didn't see that white had to move c4, but they did. They found it. Good on them. And let's see, I played knight e5, which the engine says it's a bad, kind of a bad move. After knight takes e, queen takes e, just because the bishop, I guess, can just drop back to like a normal square, and then this is kind of goofy. This is kind of, I mean, the passed pawn is already blockaded. But c4, we have knight e5, queen takes e5, and then the bishop, I thought, to h6 was not as optimal as the other moves, but rook f, we moved to d8. We have b3 on the board, bishop to d6, yeah, g3, rook back to e8, bishop to f4, skewering the queen, so we had no choice but to trade bishops, and rook a to d8, yep. Pushing his pawn in order, well, I don't know, that's probably the mistake that cost him, yeah, to lose all his advantage, because I don't see why it's necessary. He probably just wanted to have doubled his pawns already there. I guess he'd be dropping that pawn, is probably what his concern was. So yeah, he loses his equality. Rook to e7, and then we have the standoff here, both the Alekhines guns, I guess, pointing towards this central pawn. Sorry, I just lost my spot there. But yeah, after this series of moves, I sacrifice a pawn, which is probably a little bit wild. I guess it likes it because, yeah, the engine actually likes that pawn sacrifice there. But before this, there were a series of king moves. There were, I was trying to get my queen around this way, push f5 and go up. He pushes f4, so I had to basically return back, king up, and then the pawn sacrifice it actually likes, because after c5 you get this square. At least that was my reasoning. You get queen to d5 check, queen blocks, and then I don't know if that's the most accurate. I played for queen to c4. Queen goes back, and then rook to, yeah, that was a mistake, I guess, because I thought that was a mistake, but the engine is much better at calculating than I am. I think after just king moves in, no, it's not. That's not the move. Let's see. What is the concrete line after we get two passed pawns here? Maybe just using their own pawn. Rook to c2, really. c3. Then, is it king to e4? Yeah. And that stops my pawn advance, basically. Because if we go up, rook takes the other pawn. Rook takes c3. And I'm basically cooked after that. But yeah, that was hard to calculate, probably. So rook d5. And then I had rook to e8 check. Forcing his king back. Rook to e3 check, and then yeah, I thought it was about equal, but we played for this queen versus two rooks with e2 on the board. Yeah. rook d8 check. Of course, the king has to move. And then we ended up winning this pawn. Rook takes e2. We win another pawn, creating 2-pass pawn for ourselves. And then after I take this pawn, is pretty much winning for me, unless his king is able to use the rooks to checkmate me, because eventually these are going to queen. And you can slowly see, I mean, I would say it's probably harder to play with 2 rooks than a queen in most of these types of endgames, because there's just like so many traps that I could set. For instance, like this, if he takes a rook, of course there's the fork there. And then I did it again with after he moved rook to b8, trying to stop this pawn advance, but it actually is a false threat, because now if rook takes either pawn, it's getting forked on the same square. So yeah, and then I think he started to panic by this point, which is understandable because he's losing. And then at this point, final tactic to just seal the deal. We take the rook, promote, and then it's just GG from there. So, yeah, going into an analysis, I guess, of the opening, we have this could have gone into an open Sicilian, of course, if he had pushed d4. But when you play knight c3, generally I like to play knight f6 instead of knight c6, because I am a Najdorf player. And what that means is, if I play knight c6, which might be what some books like recommend, and it's a fine move, like there's nothing wrong with that move, d4 hits the board, and now this is a fundamentally different type of Sicilian than the Najdorf that I play, which is which would transpose after knight f6, and then takes, and then a6. So he still could have transposed into the Najdorf after knight to c3, which is the reason that I bring that knight out first. I mean, those are like small subtleties that you have to think about. Like, what type of Sicilian player are you? Are you looking to play like d6, or do you normally bring the knight to c6 after you push c5? Like, and those are the moves you should be playing. Basically, if they go for like a close, it looks like a closed Sicilian, but they haven't pushed d4 yet, basically play it as if it's like an open Sicilian still, and it could still transpose, like, be aware it could still transpose into an open, and you want to be prepared based off the type of Sicilian player you are. So knight f6, of course, bishop c4. E6 is the response I like to play pretty much any time a bishop lands on c4, whether it's during the Najdorf, whether it's during the Bowdler attack, which is if you bring out this bishop before the knight on c3, or whether it's in positions like this, which are like a mix, could be like still transpose into some variation of the Najdorf. So that's the reason I played e6. a6 is fine if you want to get like an early b5 in as well. Either or is like pretty okay. And then castles, or he plays a3 first, but yeah, you can play a6, you can play bishop e7, play queen c7. d5 is also a solid move. The reason I played d5, obviously, is because I thought if this bishop drops back, it kind of takes a sting out of d5, because at the end we get a tempo. So I played d5 because we get that tempo there. And then, yeah, the engine is given like crazy. Queen e7 check, and it's hoping for like in exchange and then use these center. I like to keep pieces on the board more because I'm human. And then yeah, probably instead of playing C takes D, definitely push C4. And the idea is to go for that pawn blockade if you see something like this, because now this not on C3 is kind of goofy, because you want to have your pawn on C3 instead and your bishop on this diagonal. So now if I push C4, like, I think you cement in the fact that black is playing for an edge here. So I mean, that's analysis on that. It's sort of a mix of, I guess, like a closed Sicilian opening, or yeah, it's a mix of, it's like a Bowdler with knight c3 in there, I should say. It's a Bowdler attack with the inclusion of knight c3, and that's basically how you would want to play against it, c4 instead of c takes d if it arrives on the board that late and the bishop is already on the goofy square of a2. So hope you enjoyed that video. Hope it was instructive and at least entertaining. As I got into the end game there, I was kind of tense, but yeah.